Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to spending the next 3-4 hours with you. The food will last. Looks like a hearty group. I know you're here for the duration. Can I ask? I'm going to ask a couple of questions. How many of you are involved in some way of providing educational, therapeutic treatment services to children, whether or not they have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders? In some role, a teacher, a therapist, a clinician, family support. Great. Do we have family members here? Parents, relatives of individuals perhaps diagnosed and receiving services, or to be receiving services? Okay, great. And everybody else just just came in off the street and hangers on. Excellent, excellent. I'll try to get us all maybe even a little bit more aware and knowledgeable and interested in something called applied behavior analysis, and in particular how it relates to, here it says improving educational outcomes. That sounds like somebody who still needs to get tenure when you write that way. And it's all about improving quality of life, making the day-to-day life experience better, happier, more successful, more productive, not only for children and as they become adults with autism spectrum disorders, but for the significant others in their lives, their families, their peers, their neighbors, eventually their co-workers, and so forth. Before launching into that, though, north of the border, I thought I ought to try to establish my creds, my street cred with you. Frankly, I couldn't stand on a pair of ice skates to save my life. That's the truth. And that's kind of pathetic. I grew up in Michigan. It's not like I don't know about this stuff of being cold most of your life and having hard water and so forth. But see that guy there in the middle? Jamie Heward, Columbus Blue Jackets, NHL. You guys know about hockey, right? You know, we have a minor league team that's trying to play in the NHL right now, but we got one really good guy. You loaned us, this Rick Nash fellow. But Jamie, turns out, was a defenseman the first couple of years with the Blue Jackets, and Jamie's a real cowboy. That's him, the handsome cowboy from Regina on the left. I'm the hanger-on trying to pretend I'm a cowboy. I don't know if we're related. We convinced each other we were. We have enough beers, and you say, well, you know, you've got these ancestors that came through there. Yeah, let's decide it is. Here's the talk. Here's an outline for the talk. I'm going to start with offering for you a behavioral or behavior analytic perspective on autism spectrum disorders. It's not the perspective, it's not the only way to think about what is autism, how we might respond to it, but it's a meaningful one from people who are trying to use the science of applied behavior analysis to improve the quality of lives for people with autism. And then just spend a little bit of time, well, what is this thing called applied behavior analysis? And just as importantly, a little bit on what it isn't. There's tremendous misconceptions about what ABA is and is not. Why is behavior analysis so well suited? And why have the research data that have evaluated different approaches to designing education and treatment for children with autism, why has ABA repeatedly come out as the most efficacious? And then some characteristics of high-quality education programs, whether they be home-based, clinic-based, center-based, school-based. There's some kind of overall characteristics. In particular, I am talking more about as children reach preschool and school age and when they're in group kind of education and support settings. And then finally, I'll just end with a few resources. Many or all of you may already be fully aware of these, but I'll suggest some resources for you for those who'd like to learn more about applied behavior analysis as it relates to helping people with autism. Well, the field of autism has, as you know, undergone tremendous changes in the last couple of decades. It wasn't that long ago that autism was considered and was in fact, because of the very few number of people identified, an extremely rare disability. to increasing awareness and interest in education, in medicine, but in society in general. And just to give you a sense of the time, in my own country, in the US, autism was not even a disability category under which school-age children would be eligible to receive special education services until 1990. That's not that long ago. And that was when the US Congress amended and reauthorized for the third time our nation's federal special education law, originally called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. Today it's IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. But autism wasn't even in there initially. Leo Kanner, a psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, he was the first to describe the condition, which he called early infantile autism. When he published the case reports on a group of 11 children that he had been working with, that in Kanner's words, displayed behavioral characteristics that, quote, so markedly and uniquely varied from anything reported so far that each case merits a detailed consideration of its fascinating peculiarities, end quote. Well, the children Kanner described shared the characteristics shown here. And while autism has intrigued psychologists, physicians, and researchers, it can be a frightening, exhausting, and heartbreaking experience for the children and the families affected by the condition. Until quite recently, the prognosis for a child diagnosed with autistic disorder was extremely poor, with problems in daily living persisting into adulthood for 90% of cases, and problems at the level of requiring intensive supervision and support in all environments. Well, researchers around the world are working to discover the causes of autism, and hopefully from that research, eventually interventions and treatments may even prevent it from occurring to begin with. But although biochemical scientists have identified some of the genetic markers that correlate with an increased incidence of autism, the cause, or more likely, very likely, causes of autism remain unknown. But parents and teachers cannot wait for some ultimate cause to be discovered and then in turn some treatment or for preventions based on that cause. Parents and teachers have to care for and teach the children that we have today. And fortunately, a great deal has been learned on how to effectively improve the learning and daily lives of people with autism. Today, teachers and therapists and parents are taking advantage of the findings of a large and growing body of research from a science called applied behavior analysis to help improve the lives of children with autism. One of the best and I think clearest statements about how autism can and perhaps should be viewed from the perspective of behavior analysis is this one by Gina Green. She said autism is a syndrome of behavioral deficits and excesses that have a biological basis, but are nonetheless amenable to change through carefully orchestrated, constructive interactions with the physical and social environment. Because a child with disabilities is already behind his same-age peers, we must teach him more in less time, or he'll fall further and further behind. Instructional time is a precious commodity for all students, especially those with disabilities, and in particular for students identified with autism. For no group of learners is this more true than for children with autism. Curriculum and instruction must be designed thoughtfully, delivered with intensiveness and, frankly, a sense of urgency, done so with optimal effectiveness in mind, and all of those efforts being directly and continuously evaluated for their effectiveness. So if things aren't going as well as we would hope, if learning isn't occurring as it needs to occur, we'll change something to try to make our efforts more effective. And applied behavior analysis is a science that provides a tremendous amount of foundational knowledge in terms of basic concepts, but also now a significant body of particular interventions, if you will, instructional strategies and tactics that research has shown to be effective in helping children with autism learn. So what is applied behavior analysis? We'll step back from autism in a moment, and just I'll share with you a textbook definition. And I picked a textbook that was handy. Applied behavior analysis is a science. Keep that in mind. ABA is a science. It's not a particular method of teaching or intervening. It's a science that provides us with knowledge on how to more effectively intervene and teach. It's a science in which tactics, that means specific ways of doing something that are derived from these basic principles of behavior, those tactics are systematically applied for a reason, and that is to improve socially significant behavior, said another way, things that make a difference in the quality of people's lives. So if I'm working as a teacher or an in-home therapist or in a clinic setting or a community-based program, wherever the environment, if I'm meaningfully using knowledge derived from applied behavior analysis, I'm focusing those tactics that I've derived from that knowledge on behaviors that make a difference in that child's lives and his or her significant others. That's what we mean by socially significant. And undergirding all of this is experimentation. Now, you can do experiments without focusing your research on socially significant outcomes, and that wouldn't be this science. You can be as concerned as anybody in the planet and care as much as anybody on the planet for a child's welfare and to try to help him have a better now as well as a better future, and be implementing strategies and tactics to try to do that. But if those things that you're using do not have this evidence base, this science behind them, then we shouldn't call that or think that what we're doing is based on applied behavior analysis. So how about an example related to autism? Here's a young gal with autism who in the last couple years, with a lot of support from her parents and collaborative work in both general or regular education teachers and special education teachers, is learning to not only be physically in a general education classroom, but now start to interact meaningfully on the social side as well as the academic curriculum side. One of the how to be an effective student skills that all of us must learn, typically at one point or another, is how do you get the teacher's attention? What's this whole hand-raising thing? When do you do it? Why do you do it? What's the proper responding, and so forth? That's not typically taught to kids in school, but our kids, the kids that you're working with, very much often need explicit instruction and practice and opportunities to be successful in some of those skills we take for granted. And this is just one example of many things across someone's day, from getting up in the morning to going to bed at night, of things that we may take for granted but may need to be taught. And we determine that on an individual basis. But here's an example, a recent issue of the flagship journal in this science called, you guessed it, the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, or JABA. This is by Charania, LeBlanc, Carr, and Gunby, Teaching Effective Hand-Raising to Children with Autism During Group Instruction. There's one of the graphs from that study. That's the science part. We want to make sure, does this work? What aspects of doing this, whatever this instructional intervention was to help the kids raise their hand, what makes it more or less effective? What can we take from that research study, that science, that translates into meaningful practice for teachers and parents and clinicians and so forth? Okay? I know it's impossible to see what's on the graph from there, but that's, if you want to really get scientific about it, what this part of their study is, a multiple baseline experimental design across 3 classes of hand-raising behavior. It's actually hand-raising, but doing it at the appropriate time to questions at the top. Who has the something? Who knows the secret word? who knows the answer, and then they taught the kids to do this in small groups as a step towards eventually being where this young lady is. There's a number of ways you can, dates you can pick as the beginning of this field, this discipline, this science of applied behavior analysis. Certainly was a lot going on before 1968, but that's a meaningful year. 2 publications. The first issue of JABA was published in 1968. If you've not yet had the time to read many times over the very exciting article by Bear, Wolf, and Risley called Some Current Dimensions of Applied Behavior Analysis, I recommend that to your nighttime reading list. And in that article, Bear, Wolf, and Risley, who were 3 of the really founding fathers of this branch of behaviorism, behavior analysis, the larger science, they outlined what they thought ought to be the defining characteristics. And they came up with 7. What do you think the first 3 were? Applied, behavioral, analytic. And they gave examples of all those things. And then they also said, well, it ought to work. It ought to be strategies you can use with precision and reliability, technologically clear. It ought to be based on some fundamental principles, because it's not a bag of tricks. There's some tricks we can learn, but we're very limited in what we can do with those if we don't understand and have the knowledge of the basic principles that underlie them. And from there, then we can modify those particular interventions to be successful with each and every individual case we're working with. And they talked about the importance of effectiveness, and there ought to be these generalized outcomes. Changing behavior is great, and we celebrate it, and we should when we're changing important or socially significant behavior. But if it doesn't last from this morning to the afternoon or tomorrow or next week, maintenance over time, or it doesn't last from this play group to that one, or making change and handling my money in the classroom practice but not at the store, those kinds of things also need to be built into our teaching and instruction. And all of those elements are fundamental characteristics of this science and of the best studies that are conducted within this science. It's turned out that a fellow named B.F. Skinner, some of you probably heard of him, wrote one of his many books, was published in '68 as well. It's called The Technology of Teaching. And in that book, Skinner outlines his ideas at the time on making instruction of all kinds more effective. He was not talking, of course, about children without autism. He wasn't talking about children with special needs. He was talking about typically developing kids, and he was referring to from preschool to the university. Skinner himself was particularly interested in programmed instruction, how to take curriculum content, break it into small pieces, have students respond and get feedback on that piece, and then thoughtfully add additional information to that. The field has advanced tremendously in the 40-some years since the first issue of JABA and Skinner's Technology of Teaching. At the same time, everything you'll find in this early work is still as relevant and pertinent today as it was then. That doesn't mean it's not better understood and more refined, but the basic principles have proven reliable. One of the biggest events that still has a tremendous influence around the world, one of the biggest events in terms of bringing ABA, making it aware, making parents and in particular and families aware of there's something called applied behavior analysis that could help their children. There's a book called Let Me Hear Your Voice, A Family's Triumph Over Autism by Catherine Maurice. She's a very interesting woman. She actually has a PhD in French literature and had 2 children diagnosed with autism. Some of you have read this book. Yes, a couple? Share your copies with her. Get it back out and read it. It's a powerful story. She's a wonderful writer. But she described her family's experience, the fear, the concern, the worry, the anxiousness, the doing everything on this planet that you can possibly do, as any parent would, to try to get a meaningful help for a child afflicted, whether it's with leukemia or, in this case, autism. And in the story, she talks about going from one therapist, from one doctor to another, being told this, that, and the other thing, of trying everything under the sun. And eventually a young woman, she's a student at Columbia University. Catherine's family lived just outside of New York City, knocked on their door, and she said, "Hi, I'm Bridget Taylor. I saw your ad, you need some help, I'm here to help." Well, long story short, Bridget is one of the stars of the book. She was the first person that came in and really worked very diligently and intensely with the Maurice's children. Skip ahead a few years, the children are now in college. By the time they were late elementary school, turns out in this case neither child was diagnosed anymore. Not only with not diagnosed with autism, but they were not receiving special education. They made tremendous gains. Not all children improved that much. These two kids did. Bridget Taylor has her PhD. You can Google her. She is the founder and director of something called the Alpine Learning Group in New Jersey that provides services to children and families affected by autism. And Bridget continues today to contribute research. She and her staff publish articles in journals such as JABA on how to improve what we know about teaching children with autism effectively. Jump ahead a few more years, getting pretty close to today, and you can't turn around if you're in the autism world in any sense or been affected by autism without hearing about this thing called ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. I just took as an example, this is one issue, the Autism Society of America, year before last, they dedicated one of their whole issues to ABA, a powerful tool for improving the lives of people with ASD. There's a market, there's a science, there's research to show that technology, instructional technology, teaching and therapy derived from that science can really help. There's a lot of people who want that help and are demanding that help. The science and the field, it's separate from the science, the field itself, we're behind. We have not prepared enough, and societies in the States and Canada, around the world, are at this very moment working hard to develop meaningful responses to autism, not just in the education and treatment side, across all other areas as well, but on the education and treatment side, it's pretty clear, and most policymakers and governments have started to look at the research and are saying, you know what, there's something called ABA that it looks like this is worth putting some of our resources into. I understand in Ontario you have something called intensive behavioral intervention for children with autism from the Ministry of Child Health and Services, something like that. And recently, I understand the Ministry of Education has something called, is it PPM 140? And basic purpose of that is to incorporate knowledge from ABA into education and treatment for children with autism. But when I say there's a big market, you can go on and you can also just Google ABA and autism services, and you're going to find everything under the sun and all kinds of folks saying, I can do that. I'm ready to help. Send your check here. And it is often, unfortunately, very difficult for parents as well as policymakers, whether they be school boards or community organizations. How do we best direct our limited, unfortunately, but reality, limited resources for this kind of help to the folks who really can bring the goods, who know how to do it. So I just encourage everyone to learn as much as they can about this science and its relationship to autism treatment and services. I'll suggest a few locations and organizations for you to turn to at the end. But one of the things we can do is just identify briefly a couple of the really common, widely held misconceptions about applied behavior analysis as it relates to working with children with autism. And one of them is that this thing called ABA, it might be all right, but it's so limited. It consists of an adult and a child at a table doing something called discrete trial training. And that's what A.B.A. is. What are discrete trials? Discrete trials simply describes a temporal format or structure of somebody in a role of teacher, somebody in a role of student interacting. There's 3 parts to a discrete trial. The teacher presents something. What word is this? That's the first part. The learner makes a response, correct, incorrect, or doesn't respond in any meaningful way. And then the teacher makes a response to the learner's response. Oh, good job, you got it right. Or no, it's this sound, say this sound. That's a trial. All teachers do that. All parents do it. ABA didn't invent that. It's been around since Aristotle and the Greeks. It can be done. It's the way law students are taught. It's the way med students are taught a lot of things. It's the way coaches work with it. It's the way piano teachers work with it. It can be done really, really well. And to do it really, really well, I'd suggest you inform that kind of instruction with information from this science of ABA. It can be done really, really lousy. So don't be fooled if somebody's sitting at a table with a child providing a lot of stuff real fast. They're necessarily doing anything that's remotely good about ABA. I'm going to show you a little video in a little while that you won't see any discrete trials at all, and most people would not recognize that as an application of applied behavior analysis. So all teachers should know, and particularly if you're doing ABA-based intervention, should know how to do discrete trials, but there's much, much more to it. And actually, I might have, yes, I've got a little clip here of, this is a young woman working with a little girl with autism in Columbus, Ohio. The Columbus Nationwide Children's Hospital has a program, and some of their therapists are working in some of the schools. And that's where this took place. And this is a session teaching, working on some communication, some language skills. Not so much communication here, as you'll see, but some basic language skills. And it is very much a discrete trial training structured session.
Hey, what do you want to work for? Do you want to work for... Yes, okay. Ready? Here, let's read. Aya, what is your name? Aya. That's right. Way to go, kiddo. Good job. Can you give me fives? Aya, give me high fives. All right. Way to go. Good job. You ready? Let's read. Ready? Let's read. What is your mom's name? Rita. Good work. Way to go. Nice job, kiddo. Nice job. Let's read. What color are your eyes? Eyes. What color are your eyes? Eyes. Oh, nice try. Nice try, kiddo. What color are your eyes? Brown. Way to go. That's it, kiddo. What color are your eyes? Brown. Way to go. Nice job.
Okay, a sequence of interactions in a discrete trial format. Whether that's meaningful or not will depend on a number of things. Fundamentally critical is how useful are these skills, this knowledge and skills that we're spending this precious time working with the child. Now here's another clip. This is in the same program, a different teacher, different girl, and they're also working on language, in this case more practical communication skills, trying to take some of the content knowledge that I might acquire in a more structured lesson like the last one we saw and learn how to use that and communicate in a more naturalistic exchange.
Aurora, how old are you? Good. You know what? I'm 24. What color are your eyes? No. Aurora, what color are your eyes? Yellow. No. Aurora. What color are your eyes?
Yellow, no brown.
She was holding a yellow crayon, so she's saying yellow.
Brown, you're right. They said my eyes are brown. Yeah, they are. Good job. Aurora, I took your picture. Now what? Scissors. What? Can you ask for scissors? Can I have scissors, please? Sure. Coconut house? A coconut house. Who lives in your coconut house? It's a red piece of fire and it's burning the doors. Oh my. Who lives in the coconut house? Does the girl live in the coconut house? Yes. So we cut her out and put her near the coconut house. Put her what? Put her... You need something else? Blue. Okay, that was good asking. Blue. Blue, not blue, not blue. So you can paste them. There you go. You gotta put the girl near the house. There you go. So far away, just put the girl. Aurora. There you go. Thank you. You're welcome.
Now, first glance, oh, that's just a lovely activity. We've got a teacher, it could be a parent, an older sibling, a therapist, doing a coloring activity with a little girl and showing a lot of interest in it. And that's exactly what it is. It's also, at the same time, within there is a very sophisticated, thoughtful, planned-ahead design to provide some particular kinds of motivations to respond and use this developing language skills that the girl's starting to have in a natural environment and situation. Fundamental main strategy that's there is called, in the early intervention special education literature, they talk about embedding learning opportunities. If you turn to the white book, it's like chapter 15, it's called motivating operations. And what's a motivating operation? It's something we do thoughtfully in the environment when we're using this principle. It's a basic notion about how behavior works. It's something we do beforehand to make more likely or less likely, i.e. to motivate. Motivation goes in both directions. Some kind of behavior we'd like to see more of or less of. So we're coloring along, and it's a cut and paste activity. What are you going to need to cut and paste? Scissors and glue. They're not there for a reason. So Aurora got up to the point where it's time to cut out the little fireplace and put it in the... And this whole talking to people is a whole new deal, and it's kind of hard to do. It's a lot easier to just rip it out. So you notice that's what we all do. We do the response effort's a fundamental notion that has to do with why we're more likely to do one thing versus another. So I start to cut it out. Teacher, just stop that. And then scissors. She starts to go for the scissors. She's got to ask for the scissors. She gets to give scissors. Then it's time to glue. It's easier to go, oh, I'm getting onto this now. She hides the glue over there, so Aurora just starts to go, And then she says, oh, can I have the glue? That's the behavior we're looking for. It produces what? Not an M&M anymore, but the most natural reinforcer for that kind of behavior in our social world. Someone else responding to our request and our interaction, and she gets it. And then at the end, it's kind of cute. She's, thank you. Oh, that's when teacher let's go. That was all applied behavior analysis under there, helping to providing information on how behavior works to help us design instructional activities to take advantage of, as best we can, these precious opportunities and time for instruction and learning. And there's this idea that ABA is good for challenging or problem behavior. It can be useful for that, but too many people, and people in education in particular, unfortunately, especially in general or regular education, will turn to this behavior mod or behavioral stuff for disruptive behavior and classroom management, but don't think about it as a source of incredible information on how to design academic curriculum and instruction to be more effective. And it's been around for quite a while, this notion that behavior analysis, behavioral approaches, well, they're okay and they're good for kids with disabilities of one kind or another, and now in particular, especially for children with autism. But not so useful, or some would even think, is this even appropriate for typically developing? Or how about gifted and talented students? Well, turns out it's the same basic principles of behavior, and I did my best to use them. Not always as successful as I would like and should have been, but I used the same basic things when I was teaching my graduate courses at Ohio State University. I do my best to model, but also to use those same teaching principles in courses that are about teaching those principles, because that's what found to be most effective. Another kind of overarching misconception is that there is something called the ABA method, or we're doing ABA, and there's one way to do it, and it means doing this and not that. In fact, applied behavior analysis does not prescribe any particular teaching technique. There's some fundamental principles of behavior, reinforcement, stimulus control, as the extinction, for example, these basic principles, kind of like gravity. They're there. How do we best take advantage of them in a teaching and learning situation? And ABA is not, importantly, any of what have become brand names for applications of this science, the Lovaas method, or PECS, Picture Exchange Communication System, or the verbal behavior method, or pivotal response training. Well, it turns out all of those, my EGs, my examples there, those aren't bad things. Those are all incredible approaches that have been built, though, upon this science. So when you look at applications in the research on PECS, the Picture Exchange Communication System, you'll see it conceptualized and evaluated with this science called applied behavior analysis. And the same goes for the pioneering work that Lovaas and his students have done and continue to do. Not Lovaas himself, unfortunately. Really what applied behavior analysis does, it offers educators, families, therapists, a collection of basic strategies and tactics with this, again, peer-reviewed scientific empirical evidence that here's some stuff that works. It also brings with it a philosophy. And it's not an ideology like, oh, you got to just sing the catechism, or that's not it. When you learn about the science, though, the philosophy that underlies it, it's a very, not only incredibly humanistic one, but it's a very optimistic one. And it's that we can change behavior. And it's a philosophy that doesn't say, well, whatever this individual's problems, be they challenging behavior or difficulty in learning, or we don't say that, well, it's just the result of an inherent trait. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. We say, well, we think, and we've got all this data over decades to show that others have been successful doing this, we think that we can systematically arrange an environment that will make possible and support new behavior and new learning. And it's just a very optimistic approach that requires, though, a lot of responsibility with it. When you go that way, you're saying, shoot, kid's not learning. What's that mean? Oh, remember, he's got autism. Or learning to, no, means I'm not teaching yet. So I've got to look at what I'm doing and try to do it better. Probably what applied behavior analysis brings to practitioners more than anything, perhaps the most important thing, is this commitment to direct and frequent evaluation. It requires saying, here are the behaviors I want to see as a result of these interactions, of these lessons, of this curriculum, of this program. And I've defined them in a way that I can recognize them when they occur and not occur. And I will count that. It's almost always what measurement comes down to. Counting. How often? What's the occurrence of this? Where and when? And then use that information, i.e. data, if you want to talk fancy. Do that on your BCBA test. You use that information to look at what we're doing and celebrate improvements when we see them, and roll up our sleeves and analyze more carefully what changes we might make in our intervention to be more successful. That's absolutely the foundation of this approach. Well, I mentioned PECS before, but this slide just lists a whole number of examples of teaching techniques derived from or built upon this knowledge base from applied behavior analysis. We saw one example, the second little video was be an example of a naturalistic teaching interaction to teach communication and social skills in that case, alternative communication modes such as PECS, a whole tremendous range of research literature applied again on what's generally called peer-mediated interventions, but having the other kids help in the teaching. It might be literally things like peer tutoring, working on sight words and math problems together. But it also would involve, I think I've got a little clip here in a bit, of kids interacting with one another to help, again, this target child or the children with special needs acquire social skills. A whole lot of self-management research, helping kids learn to be responsible for themselves, to become more independent, to control their environment, and so on. I'll just spend a second on this, but just to at least let you know that I know, and now I know that you know, there is a whole lot of pretty serious investigation and research and comparison of various ways to try to help children with autism. And done by all kinds of scientific organizations and professional associations. And one of the biggest is something called the National Standards Project by the National Autism Center. If you're not aware of this, it's just nationalautismcenter.org. You can go on, you can download for free all of their reports. But they did something called the National Standards Project, just published a couple years ago. And they put together this this body of 20, 30 people representing all different areas of treatment for kids with autism. And they collectively reviewed and debated and evaluated by various criteria the existing research. And they did it with the idea of coming up with what they would call established treatments, as opposed to treatments that aren't yet established, and even treatments that have might even have deleterious negative effects. And significant findings, there they are. The overwhelming majority of these interventions, they found 11 treatments that they identified by their criteria as established. The overwhelming majority were developed in the behavioral literature. In other words, applied behavior analysis, behavioral psychology, and positive behavioral support. This is one of the recent, very large reviews of the literature by Sven Eikeseth in Norway. And based on these guidelines, interventions based on ABA will be considered well established. And frankly, it's not that other efforts to help children with autism don't work at all, or are bad, or you should never consider them. It's just that ABA is the best game in town. And that's what the data tells us at this point. Maybe something else will come along and be better. Better's always better, right? But in our responsibility as practitioners, as community policymakers, and certainly as teachers and as parents and family members, to do the best that we can now for the children that we're working with or responsible for, it would seem we'd really want to learn as much as we can about this ABA thing, and then go about seeing how it can best be, that knowledge can best be taken advantage of for the children we're responsible for and that we care about. Well, there's other studies. There was a couple you could go look at. But why is applied behavior analysis the most effective treatment? Okay. That's been established. A tremendous amount of research has looked into that. That's been established. Well, why is that so? This question was asked to Don Baer. And Don was, he was that Beowulf and Risley guy. He was a professor of, they used to call them home ec departments. That's out anymore. It kind of just sounds like you're making cakes and sewing dresses, but it's human development, human ecology. Don was a professor at the University of Kansas, which those of you in this area know that's kind of one of the, it's not Western Michigan University, but a close second. One of the places where a lot of great work was done, and it's not Ohio State either. But Don was the first editor, one of the first editors of JABA. He's done just tremendous amount of work. His students and their students are all over the world, and I'm sure in Ontario as well. And he was asked, well, why is that? And here was his response. He said, I think it's because ABA is the field, the discipline, that's most commonly studied the problem of what to teach, in what order, and what techniques will do that most effectively. So, what are the usual behavior changes? What are the skills, the knowledge that behaviorally informed programs tend to target and identify and work their darndest to help children with autism learn? And Bear going on, he said, well, the highest priority often is communication skills, preferably spoken, but if not, we'll communicate however we can. And for example, picture exchange might be how we're doing that at this time. But what does communication do? It gives the child, as it does all of us, more control over our world, over our social environment. We interact with people, we get things we want, we avoid things we don't want, we can be helpful, and so forth. The next priority is social skills, to make the child enduring to the parents and acceptable to others. And again, social skills give a child, as they do each of us, more control over our environment. The kind of social environment, and the kinds of controls that the social environment finds desirable or acceptable. Children with significant behavioral deficits and excesses, and that would include most all kids identified with autism spectrum disorder, they already control their environment. It's not they don't know how to do that, it's just we'd like them to do it in a different way. Aggressive behavior, self-injurious behavior, unending tantrums, refusal to do anything, an unbelievable narrow food preference, so on and so forth, sleep problems at night. I'm doing all that. I'm controlling my environment, but not in a way that makes quality of life very good for anybody else around me, but also incredibly hampers my opportunities in life. To do things. So communication, social skills. Well, here's an example of a social skills interaction. This is a lesson, again informed by applied behavior analysis, and it's an example of something from this peer-mediated intervention research. Young lady with autism is on the right. There are two of her typically developing classmates, and they're walking down the hall. She spends part of the day, about half of it now, in a regular or general education classroom, and the other half in a special education, we call them in the States a resource room, where I'll go for part of the day for intensive explicit instruction, ideally. That's what's happening there by a skilled teacher, to work on particular skills that the child needs.
Allison, we're going to go ask your friends to play. Okay? They're playing the game over there. See really loud in the basket, okay? Your big girl voice. Very good. Allison, flip it over. Whose turn is it? Oh, whose turn is it? Brianna's turn. Okay. Whose turn is it? My turn.
All dressed in black, with silver buttons all down her back. She asked her mother, for big
Oh, be careful, Allison.
To say that elephant jumped up big. They jumped so high, to touch the sky. They never come back.
Allison had quite a few years of being about an isolated, self-isolated, aloof child, socially alone child, as you can imagine. I'm kind of textbook case, and just a lot of work, a lot of effort, good cooperation between the parents at home and what was happening at the school. And I mean, you should have seen her mother's smile when she saw, her daughter finally just this little. She's not going to give us much, but it's starting, and Allison has made significant progress there. The two little girls, yeah, they're just playing, but we're taking advantage of their just playing. And so there's practice and role playing with the peer interventionists. They're our little teacher helpers. And so they know exactly what to do. Now, one of the challenges of any sort of real supportive, intensive intervention, whether it's to help children diagnosed with autism or other disabilities or special needs, is this problem of prompt dependency. And so we'll have a child go into a general ed classroom for a while. We'll have the aide or classroom aide sit with them. You've got to be really careful that the aide, caring so much about the child, doesn't in fact do everything for the child and become the child, and in effect the child gets fewer, not more, opportunities to blossom and grow. And so you can see that there with that was a teacher aide, and she's providing, we don't know because we were in there videotaping too, she wanted to be on there, but she was providing a little more help than Allison needed at that lesson. But as long as you're just kind of aware of those things and you gradually shift, and most important, you're taking data, you're observing, how's it going, and then you change accordingly. Learning independent skills enables a child to control his environment and become, more than that, a self-directed learner, potentially. So communication, social skills, and independent skills. Three incredibly important aspects of anybody's repertoire, your fancy word for the collection of things we know and can do, is really important. The sequence of slides here is just from some work that one of my former students has done with his colleagues, where they've taken this notion of activity schedules. I'm going to show you a little clip of an activity schedule in just a second. But they're doing what they call multimedia activity schedules. And it's so easy now. It's wonderful with digital cameras and iPads, and how you can make videos of people in their real world, in their real environments, and the people they know in them, they're in them themselves, and take advantage of that information as instructional materials. But this little guy, he'd go and he'd click on the computer, and he'd pick which activity he'd like to do. Then there'd be a little video of him doing that activity that they had staged and filmed before, and then there'd be a cue to, okay, go ask Johnny to do it with you and play and so forth, and put the stuff away, and it just would guide him through. Well, you certainly don't need an iPad or a smartphone or a computer to do those kinds of things. Most around the world are low tech. Here's a little clipboard with some laminated activity icons, and this is the graduates of our master's degree program in early childhood special education at Ohio State. I was in the special ed program, by the way. That's where the ABA faculty at Ohio State is located primarily. And that's the profession, that's our shared profession. In fact, John Cooper, Tim Heron, and I, and our other colleagues there, our profession is special education, trying to design systematic, effective curriculum and instruction for learners with special needs. The philosophy and science that we rely upon to help us try to do that well is this thing called applied behavior analysis. Applied behavior analysis, as you know, if you've worked in the area, or as you will know as you learn more about it, is a relevant science for any endeavor, for any profession at all, for which knowing how does behavior work and how can we change it humanistically and effectively, then that science of ABA is relevant. So I could be a restaurant manager, I could be the baseball coach, I couldn't be the hockey coach, we already got that solved. I couldn't be the piano teacher, I can be the industrial highway safety consultant, and I can bring knowledge from this science of ABA to make myself more effective in that profession. So here she is, and she's in an early childhood. Actually, this is in a school that serves mostly kids with autism spectrum disorders, but the classes are organized such so that neighborhood, typically developing kids are in there as well. So they're integrated or so-called inclusive classrooms.
Groups of 3 or 4 typical peers with special needs children. They're given 5 choices from the different areas in the room, and as a group they pick 3 choices, and they have to follow that schedule as a group together and finish it together. So it works on social interaction skills and following the schedule. And we also have work schedules, which is more where we introduce academics. They go to the computer, handwriting station, and art and craft station, and they're also broken up in smaller groups that they go to each center with. The groups are a mix of typical kids with special needs kids, and we use the typical kids to help them transition from area to area instead of having to have an adult to assist them, and also a computer and handwriting. Some of the kids who may need hand over hand help, we encourage the peers to assist with helping them so the they're not always dependent on an adult. After they finish the area that they're in, they take off the icon, take off books, and then they're all done, they put it in the bucket, put it in, that says they're all done, and that way they know their next choice is, what is left on the schedule.
Playground time. Okay, what comes next? Outside. Wow. We have 3. We're going outside 2 times. Music time. Work time. Lunch. You got it mixed up, but you made them talk. All right.
That's a cool little device. You record a word or 2 of what the activity icon is, and then when you stick it on there, you push it, and it will say it. So it could be the child's voice, it could be a parent's voice, it could be the teacher's voice. So children begin to learn, again, ideally in collaborative groups, in social groups, how to follow a schedule, how to make some choices about what do I want to do next, what do I need to do before I get to do something else, and get some practice in that. And eventually, those students are, as they progress in age, ideally they find themselves in academic classroom and down the road other environments such as employment environments where you're expected to complete tasks by yourself as independently as possible, and that can be a tremendous challenge for children with autism. Here's a young man, Brandon, and he's going to explain to us a little apparatus he uses called the motivator. Got a little slide and tell you about what the motivator is.
What is this motivator thing? Explain it to us.
It is a sort of like a machine that buzzes in whatever time a teacher sets it for.
So how many minutes do I set it for? Actually, you set it. So how many minutes do you set it for?
5.
5 minutes. And what happens when it hits 0? What does it do?
It buzzes.
Show us. Does that hurt? Does it tickle? Good. Okay. So when it buzzes, what does that tell you? What does that tell you? If you're working and it buzzes, what does that tell you to do?
It tells me to put 5 points on my clicker.
Great. Let's see. You already have 5, right? Come on, put the 5 on there. Show us how it works. Now you can add 5 to that.
He's very honest, he didn't earn those 5.
Okay, great. So how many points do you have to earn at the end of the day?
109 today.
Okay, and what happens when you get 109 points? What do you do next?
I I'm Brandon Jr. and he is my snail.
So Brandon Jr. is your snail?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it looks like you already had a lot of great days so far. Okay. What happens when you fill up the shell with stickers?
There's a surprise at the end.
There's a surprise at the end?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So are you excited to get to the center of the snail?
Uh-huh.
So do you think other students would like to use a motivator?
I really think a motivator would help students who are who have bad grades from lack of work. And I think it would be really good for the teachers and the students who do not think they can do their work.
Whew, you did it. It's kind of quite a pyramid scheme she had going with Brandon. Well, first do this, and you get 5 points, and get 109. I don't know where they've been doing it for a few. And then you get a sticker on Brandon the snail. At that point, he loved having the motivator on. He was a big guy. He's a little girl that would sit next to him. He said it doesn't tickle. They loved the whole tickling, just a little vibration. And so one of his favorite things to do, another little reinforcer he'd earn, is to get to hold it on his classmates would line up and, and buzz him with it. But there's other similar devices now, but this is one that's been out for a while, and you could just look it up if you were interested in find. They cost about $20. You put a AAA battery in it, and you can set the time either for standard or random intervals. And there is a really neat article. I didn't bring a reference to it. Anyone's interested, my email will be on the last slide. Those of you that are still here at 9, when we get to that slide, just email me. And if you have that or any other question, I could send you back. There is a neat article that's something like 20 ways to use a motivator in a classroom. And 10 of them are things that the professionals, the teachers, can use to remind us to catch them being good and other skills. And about half of them then are ways that the children, the students, the learners can use motivators to be more independent and to get their work done. And I don't know if I mentioned it. That's an article you can download the PDF of it and access that information. Okay, I'm going to suggest 8 characteristics that I think are vitally important for any high-quality education program for children with autism. And the first relates to Don Baer's response of what skills to teach. A program should have individualized, meaning for each child. It's not a one-size-fits-all, everybody's going to learn this, then everybody learns this, and everybody learns this. Well, I already know a couple of those things, and I really need this thing that's not on that list. That's the individualized assessment and very thoughtful selection of targeting what behaviors to aim our effective instructional weapons at. And second, there should be evidence-based practices for trying to change those behaviors. Now, for my money, this will come as no surprise to you. The best evidence base to find that is a science called applied behavior analysis. But whatever you're doing, ask the question. And if you're the consumer, if you're the taxpayer, if you're the school board member, if you're the parent, where's your data for what you're doing? What's the peer-reviewed research that shows that this works now? More importantly, and I'll get to this as one of these critical elements, what's the data showing your use of this with my child or our kids or our citizens? There needs to be active programming for this idea, very critical aspect of generalization and maintenance, that I can do it in other settings, I can do it, whatever those skills are, with other people, not just the classmates or teachers I practiced them with. I can do it tomorrow, next week, next year, if I need to. And there is now today a pretty sophisticated, by no means complete, but a pretty sophisticated and, again, solid research-based body of knowledge of how to make these generalized outcomes much more likely. Maintenance over time, doing it in other settings and situations. And that needs to be just not talked about, but here in our lessons plans, this is what we build in to make that generalization more likely. Here's an example. Here's a young man. Again, he'd spend part of the day in a special education classroom, and for him, Javen was just starting to spend a little bit of time kind of out there in the rest of the school. And the music teacher, as you'll see, this is a music class, a little lesson episode we're going to look at, was wonderful to work with the special ed teachers. And they were working together to help this young man generalize skills he was learning in the general ed, in this special supportive environment, the special ed classroom, in an inclusive classroom, in this case music. And this is a little guy who absolutely would have nothing to do with anybody else, would run for them, away from them, didn't want to be in groups, and you'll see that that's starting to change.
Okay, so now you have what?
Mr. Stoffer.
Mr. Dover, that's right. For what, music? Alright. Alright. Let's clean off your happy face cards so you can get some more music, okay? Because remember...
And Mr. White.
Right, if we're happy faces, we see the letter people, right? Right.
Say it again, but I appreciate the way you're looking at me. Please make sure you're sitting up tall, ready to go. Good, Caitlin. Remember, we're going to act as if we're not being filmed today. We're going to do just what we normally do, all right?
I'm not buying that.
We pledge to respect one another, be trustworthy and fair. We will care about each other and be good citizens. Above all else, we will take responsibility for our actions in our quest to build a better you and a better me. Good, one more time. Here we go. We pledge to respect one another. A better you, a better me. A better you, a better me. We'll be the best that we can be. We'll build it up, not tear it down. We're gonna change the world around. We'll be honest, we'll be fair. A better you, a better me. We'll be the best that we can be. Very good. Hold it. Please remember that when you hold it straight arms, real straight, a lot of energy, and don't move an inch, not an inch. Good, Javen. Hand down, very good. Right, yellow. Excellent. Hold it, then down. And wait for the cue for me to say down, or give you something like that. Take a seat, very good. Repeat after me, please. Alright, stop right there. Take a seat. Hand here like this. Right in front of the chest, and switch. So you're going to do. I go first, you repeat. Up, down. Elbows back. Knees bent. Knees bent. Knees bent. Thumbs up. Elbows back. Knees bent. Knees together. Bottom down.
Surely there's no applied behavior analysis at work there, right? Absolutely. One of the fundamental and really effective, almost required strategies for promoting generalization across settings and situations, which means I've learned something in this place and I need to do it in another place, or I've learned to solve long division problems on blue paper, and in this desk I've got to do them on red paper, or I've learned 3 plus 4, but I've never learned 3 plus 24. You can't teach everything in the curriculum. You teach some stuff. You need generalization to the untaught stuff and to the untaught settings and with people and places. And this fundamental strategy is to arrange things, i.e. rig it, contrive it. It's all about, education's all about contriving environments where we can learn things faster and more effectively than just natural life experience. So we contrive it, in this case, contrive a situation where there are these extra reinforcers built in this case the little marks on his card, and he could go back and play this game that he really liked to do. We do that to increase the opportunity that this little guy, here's the strategy, comes into contact with the naturally existing reinforcers in those settings where you need the behaviors to occur. Well, and that's the interaction with the teacher and the peers and the songs. And before it had nothing to do with that. But we rig it, we contrive it to make it an opportunity where he's got enough little skill going on. He'd still be in the back, but a week before, the aide had to sit right with him. A week later, he was right in the middle. And 2 weeks later, what they were doing, they were prepping, they were practicing for like a spring music show they were going to do for the community and their parents. And when that happened, he had no little thing on his belt. He was right up, kind of in the middle, second row, one of the kids in the group. But it's a process. You have to get there. And you can effectively, thoughtfully, wisely use this fundamental principle of positive reinforcement to make the behaviors that we really need to occur more often, in fact, occur more often. And so shortly thereafter, that aide, he wasn't walking down to the classroom with him anymore. Again, when they first started doing this, he wouldn't even go in the room unless the special ed teacher, the woman who was at the very start of the clip, said, "What are we going to do next?" You know, he's like hanging on to her for dear life. But he started to come into contact with reinforcers for doing a little bit. How do you make sure that happens? Well, you've got the contrived ones that are obvious, the little smiley faces, happy faces on his little laminated card. But even more important are those natural ones of working effectively, collaborating with Mr. Dover, the music teacher, to be just extra aware of, here's a child, we want to look for opportunities to reinforce. And he didn't make a big deal out of it, but he was very skilled and good at finding, good job, Javen, and coming over and giving him a little bit of attention. Structured and frequent opportunities to interact with typically developing children. I think that's a must for any program serving children and individuals with special needs. And we saw one example of that of the kids in the earlier clip playing the patty cake game. Frequent communication with and involvement by parents. Can't stress that enough. Not only to have the incredible knowledge that the parents have, and no one knows the child better than their parents, that they can share with us about the child's wants and needs and what's going on at home, but what we can do in working as a team to have some of the same efforts being consistently done both in a clinic or school setting and in the home. And if you'll allow me one brief advertisement, here's a new book called Involving Parents of Students with Special Needs, 25 Practical Strategies. And they're all very specific things that classroom teachers, whether they're special ed teachers or general ed teachers, if they have kids with special needs in their class, techniques that they might do to make it easier for parents to get involved and ways to effectively involve parents. It's a little paperback, and there's actually tear-out examples and little models of things to do. And it's everything from examples of what you might do in a beginning of the year welcome school letter, to parent interaction nights, to activities for the home, and so forth. Corwin Press, you could look it up there. The database decision-making we talked about. If it's worth teaching, it's worth measuring. And if you're not measuring it, then you just want to ask yourself, well, maybe this is something we're just doing for fun and enrichment. Fine, just know that you're doing that. And then you say, well, how much of your time that you have to work with kids is for that, and how much is we're really going to nail these communication, social, independent skills, and as children get older, academic and employment-related skills and so forth. Teachers and staff that are well-trained in applied behavior analysis, for me, that's kind of redundant to this one. If they're going to do it well, they're going to have some knowledge there. And finally, last but certainly not least, program directors, administrators that require and support the staff of doing all of the above. It's one thing to say, oh, we're doing, but you really need that leadership. And I couldn't find a picture of such an administrator. There's one out there probably somewhere, so there's no photo on this one. Now, this is, I took an excerpt, a quote from a chapter by Catherine Maurice, the author of the Let Me Hear Your Voice book, and Bridget Taylor. They wrote a chapter in a book called Focus on Behavior Analysis in Education, and it was on applications of ABA to children with autism. And they said, ABA is not a panacea. It's not a cure-all. It's not a silver bullet, but it is the most effective intervention we have at the current time. It does not offer answers as to why autism happens. It offers a practical means of helping children who are autistic. ABA does not solve all our problems, but for the moment, ABA offers all children with autism, every one of them, a real opportunity to learn. That was published 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Nothing has changed on that point. A couple of sources for you to consider if you're not already aware of them, where you can learn more about and get involved to the extent you'd like to in applied behavior analysis, as in this case, ABA International or ABAI, learn about the other aspects of the science, the basic laboratory research as well, and the theoretical, conceptual stuff if you'd like. ABA International, one word, .org, all kinds of goodies on there. And one thing in particular is a new journal called Behavior Analysis in Practice. It's not all about autism treatment. There's other things in there, but there is a lot of good information on autism interventions. Within this club, ABAI, which has something like 5,300 members in 44 countries, most of them in the US and Canada in the Western, but 44 countries around the world. The group has 16,000 affiliate members in chapters all around the world. There's an ABA India. There's an ABA Ontario, of course. I bet there's some ABA Ontario members right here in the very room. Well, I know there is. But this club, this organization, has what are called special interest groups, or SIGs. A lot of organizations have those. And one of the SIGs is the Autism SIG. And if you go to autismsig.org, you'll find a lot of materials that this group has put together. These are all behavior analysts who are involved in the research and the treatment and the practice of applying behavior analysis to children with autism. And they have produced something called Consumer Guidelines. You can get this for free, just download the PDF, for identifying, selecting, and evaluating behavior analysts working with individuals with ASD. It's written in plain English, and it's written for families, it's written for communities, decision makers, government folks. Somebody's saying, oh, I can do ABA. Well, they're saying, well, make sure you look at this, this, and this, and ask these questions. There's a group called ASAT, the Association for Science in Autism Treatment. Their website is simply asatonline.org. And again, if you don't get any of this, my email will be in a second, and I could send you all of this information and more if you're interested. ASAT is not just about autism, about ABA as an intervention and a science with help for people with autism. They're also a source for legitimate biomedical information, research, and so forth. But I highly recommend you take a look at ASAT. Catherine Maurice, the author of Let Me Hear Your Voice, one of the founding, it was really developed by parents and families. And then if you must do it, if you're really hardcore and you don't know what to read at night, you got your Canadian Club or your Crown Royal, it's been a good, long, tough day, but you still want more. There's this thing that is white, isn't it? It's a book, it's called, guess what, Applied Behavior Analysis. That might be an option for you. Another is called ABA, or Focus on Behavior Analysis in Education. You know, you can Amazon or just Google these, you find them easily. It's the same publisher, Pearson Education. And I mention this book for a couple of reasons. It's broader than special ed and autism treatment, but there's 2 chapters, they're the first 2 in the book, that are really valuable. The first one is Don Baer's last publication. And that's the publication from which I took the little quotes on the slides where he responded to the question, why is ABA so effective? And he says, well, they're real careful about studying what to teach, how to teach it, in what order, and so forth. That article is there. It's called Letters to a Lawyer. And Baer was often invited and served many times as an expert witness in court cases in the United States, where parents and families, and sometimes as a group in what's called a class action suit, were bringing legal action against a state, a government entity, or perhaps a public school district, where they were saying, our children with autism need services informed by ABA. And the school might say, oh, we're doing that, and so forth. They bring him in to, what would he, show me your data? And he did. It's not like you see on Law and Order where people are actually in the court box very often. A lot of this stuff is called depositions. They're videotaped, they're written down, and you put together. He, over the years, had this whole collection of things where he provided his expert opinion. And if anybody's an expert on applied behavior analysis, Don Baer would certainly qualify, on what ABA is and whether or not those programs were providing it for their children or the students they were serving. And he washed out all the actual names to, of course, to prevent the, keep the privacy of the guilty and the innocent and all of that. But it's a marvelous article. In his words, it says, this is my best effort to use the connotative language of everyday plain English to explain what is applied behavior analysis and why is it critically important for the development of children with autism. And the second paper is the one I took the quote, Every Child an Opportunity to Learn. It's a chapter. It's by Catherine Maurice and Bridget Taylor on autism. And finally, there's a new book out. It's about evidence-based education interventions in special education. It has a chapter on autism spectrum disorders, but covers other areas as well. You might want to get half a dozen copies of those for your neighbors. And I thank you very, very much for your kind attention.